The next morning, when Martina got up, she decided that her new life would begin immediately. She would leave Martin as far behind as possible and live only as Martina. Even though Astrid had prophesied that to her the night before and they had freed Martina's wardrobe of Martin's things together, Martina's head still hadn't completely detached itself from her male self. After sleeping on it for a night and remembering the happiness of the past weekend, Martina realized that this was the only way for her. But before she started everything official and medical, she wanted to live as a woman for a few weeks. So she got ready for the office again, made up subtly and dressed modestly, but in a skirt and heels. Astrid looked at her, kissed her, and said, "You put even the most beautiful women in the company in the shade. You look absolutely stunning, sweetheart." Martina smiled, took her work bag and her purse, and then they left the apartment together. In the office, it seemed quite normal for the colleagues in her team that Martina now came to work entirely as a woman. It stayed that way for the next 3 weeks. Neither a colleague nor a customer was shocked or dismissed. She was amazed that even her customers, who already knew her as a man, accepted the change without reservation. Of course, one or the other request came during breaks and meetings or after customer appointments. But everyone was extremely interested and had a positive attitude. After these experiences, Martina changed her profile picture on the social business networks to a more gender-neutral picture. You could assume that she was a man and also a woman. The HR department even agreed that she was given an additional email address with her female first name, which she immediately set as the default. So after 3 weeks there was almost only Martina Seymour in the company. The evening she received her female email address, she was sitting on the couch with Astrid and was just happy. Astrid noticed that her friend had completely shed her male self and was even more in love than before. But one question burned under her nails. "Honey, I can tell you've really left Martin behind. I think that's great and I love you even more for it. But how do you want to go further? Have you thought about that?" Martina had to think a little before answering. "I don't know it. I'm so happy right now, and you're right, I've completely left Martin behind. I know I haven't said anything to my parents yet, but I think it's ideal the way it is right now. Is it important to make this official? Or more precisely, is it important to you?" Astrid must have guessed it. "I'm happy the way it is. But don't you think that at some point you'll run into problems if your ID says you're a man but appear as a woman? Everything has gone well so far, but I'm afraid it won't stay that way. I just want you to be aware of that. And don't you think that you might be even happier if you didn't have to put the Silas on yourself every morning?" Martina smiled. In the last few weeks she had often thought about how nice it would be to have real breasts of her own. She hadn't given any thought to problems because she was still a man on her ID card. She promised Astrid to find out what had to be done and what the consequences would be for her. The very next day, the final trigger came for Martina to intensively take care of the next steps of her change. She was supposed to go on a longer business trip to the USA and her boss said that she should travel and perform better there as a man. Martina made a face and didn't want to travel at all. But on the one hand the customer was too important and on the other hand she was one of the key people in the project. She spoke briefly to Astrid, who advised Martina to go on the trip. Astrid also agreed with her boss that she should do the business trip better as a man, stating, "Just pick out the least feminine things you have in your closet right now and skip the Silas. Maybe you should only wear flat shoes, but then it should be fine." That evening Martina was already looking for a self-help group in her area and for tips on what to do next. Astrid was amused by her friend's frantic activity on the subject, because it was clear that she would not be one step further until the business trip 2 weeks later. On the other hand, this trip came in handy for Astrid, because from Astrid's point of view it finally pushed Martina in the right direction. When the journey was imminent, Martina packed her suitcase. Astrid helped her and gave her tips on which of her things weren't too clearly feminine. Finally, Martina had packed 2 pantsuits, matching blouses and flat shoes. In addition, 2 jeans, 2 t-shirts and 2 light sweaters, whereby Astrid noted that the tops were very feminine. When Martina got ready the next morning, she had to be very careful with her makeup. In the last few weeks she wasn't extremely, but already visibly made up. Now she had to be careful to use only very subtle makeup, because she didn't want to leave it out completely. In the end she was quite happy with the result and Astrid nodded in agreement. It was already horrifying for her to have to do without skirts and dresses for the whole of the coming week. Astrid took her friend to the airport. After Martina had handed in her suitcase, they drank a coffee together. Before Martina went through the security check, they said goodbye to each other with a heartfelt, passionate kiss. "I would love to disappear into a lonely corner with you and let you really fuck me again," Astrid whispered to Martina after they had separated. "Bad girl," laughed Martina, "but an attractive idea. Unfortunately, I have to go in there now." She pointed to the line in front of the security checkpoint. Another quick kiss and then Martina lined up for the obligatory security check. She was able to pass through security with no problems. Since she first had a short feeder flight to Frankfurt, she still had to face the bigger hurdle with passport control there. Martina was waiting in front of the gate for departure and was busy with her tablet when suddenly someone stood in front of her. "Hello Martin," she was greeted. She looked up, a bit shocked, and recognized a childhood friend from her school days. "Hi Andreas. Did you startle me?" she replied in surprise. "May I?" he asked, pointing to the seat next to Martina, who nodded in agreement. "Nice to see you again. You've changed a lot though. Do you have makeup on?" He got straight to the point. Martina's throat tightened and she became nervous. Very quietly and shyly and with trembling hands she answered, "Yes, quite a lot has changed for me." Andreas nodded, "You can see that. I don't understand how people come up with the idea of pretending to be a woman, but I have to admit, it suits you." She had feared worse, because in her memory Andreas had always been ultra-conservative and had no use for any inclinations that did not correspond to an antiquated man-woman understanding. "Thank you," she said softly. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I have to go to New York on a business trip." "And you?" Martina asked back. "I just want to go to Frankfurt and since my customer is sitting right at the airport, and the flight was just as expensive as the train ticket, I'll fly for once," Andreas stated. "Are you coming to the USA without any problems?" He pointed to Martina's outfit. "They have such strict entry requirements." Martina shrugged, "It remains to be seen but my picture in the passport already has longer hair, so it shouldn't be a problem." Andreas didn't seem quite so confident, but said nothing further about it. "How come I thought you were married?" He gestured again at Martina's feminine appearance. "First, what does one have to do with the other? And secondly, I've always found girls' and women's clothes to be more chic. At some point the desire to wear a dress was so great that I just bought one. Then I completed the outfit and temporarily transformed into a woman. I've been out in my environment for some time and I'm only a man when I absolutely have to be," summarizes Martina. Andreas made a face and Martina knew he still had the same, intolerant views. "If you think so. But you're married, aren't you? What does your wife say about that?" He persisted. "Honestly, we broke up about a year ago and will be officially divorced in 3 weeks. And so far she doesn't even know anything about it. She wouldn't understand it either and I'm no longer interested in her opinion," Martina replied gruffly. Andreas wrinkled his nose again. Then their flight was called and Andreas wished Martin a nice day. Martina had to grin and remained seated for a while. When she boarded the plane, Andreas sat in one of the first rows behind business class and Martina smiled at him as she walked by. He gave her an almost imperceptible nod with a stony expression on his face. Martina had to pull herself together not to laugh out loud. Then she found her place and sat down. In Frankfurt she had enough time and strolled to the right gate. When she went to passport control about half an hour before boarding, she got a little uneasy again. But the federal police officer just looked at her boarding pass, in her passport, looked at her and let her pass. During the flight, all the stewardesses always addressed Martina as Ms. Seymour, which flattered Martina on the one hand, but on the other hand it made her a little afraid of immigration control in the USA. Even as a man, she had always found the entry controls unpleasant. When they landed and stood in line at immigration, Martina became more and more nervous. Her heart was beating in her throat as she stood in front of the officer. He looked back and forth between her passport and her face several times, but then gave her the entry stamp and she was allowed to go through. Relieved, she looked for the baggage carousel of her flight and quickly found her suitcase. She took a taxi and was driven to the hotel. Again, all the staff were friendly and there were no problems checking in. Contrary to Astrid's recommendation, Martina had packed 2 dresses as well as the silicone breasts and a pair of high heels. For dinner she dressed up completely as a woman and finally felt like she had arrived again. She first wandered aimlessly through the streets of the small New Jersey town where her hotel was located. Then she found one of the famous American malls and strolled past the shop windows. When she got hungry, she also found a restaurant in the mall and went inside. Just as she was getting her meal, a group of men in suits walked in. Martina only glanced up and wanted to go straight back to her plate, but she recognized 2 of the men. It was her European contacts from the customer with whom she had appointments over the next few days. Martina's heart sank into her pants because Martina had not yet come out with this customer. And exactly her main contact now sat down so that he had her directly in view.